Let me stop sharing our poll results here. All right. So for us to fully get started, what I'm actually going to do right now is I'm going to, oh, we've started recording. Okay, perfect. Somebody else did that for me. Awesome. So hi, everybody. I'm Brianna Marshall, and I'm the Director of Research Services, and I'm joined here today by Rachel Starry, who's our Digital Scholarship Librarian. So here's us. You can also see our wonderful faces over here in your sidebar or however Zoom is showing us to you. I've been here at the library for 3 years, and I've been giving these workshops for just about the past year, but I really like to talk about Zotero. There are a few reasons why this is an awesome tool that I think you'll learn a lot from. So I'm actually going to be going over the first part of this workshop. I'll be talking about some context, if you're new to citation management in general, why you might want to have a citation manager and why specifically Zotero might be a good fit for you. And I'll turn things over to Rachel to introduce herself as well.
Hi everyone, I'm Rachel Starry. I'm actually fairly new to UCR libraries, and I'm the Digital Scholarship Librarian.
Perfect. And Rachel is actually going to be doing the demo in the second part. So as I go through some of this context and kind of background to thinking about citation management, a lot of that will hopefully make a lot more sense when Rachel goes through actually demonstrating for us within Zotero how all of this comes into play. So today you're going to learn what is a citation manager. Again, perfect for folks who are brand new to thinking about citation management, and how to get started using Zotero. So there are two particular aspects of using Zotero that we're going to focus on today. There's actually a lot to know about Zotero, but one of the really nice things about Zotero is that you can sort of start slow, and if you have pretty basic needs just around organizing and annotating your research and creating bibliographies, you don't have to actually dig into all of the bells and whistles. So those are the two main aspects that we're going to focus on today. We are also considering offering a more advanced Zotero workshop. So toward the end, we're going to inquire with you about whether that's something that you would be interested in taking potentially. So the slides in a workshop recording, as you may have guessed, will be made available to you following the workshop. So we hope that you can be present with us and take in what we're sharing and not feel like you need to be kind of like testing this out on your own. Of course, you're welcome to do so if you have your own device, a separate device, and you'd like to do so, but you'll be able to review this at a later time as well. So we want to learn about you. I have some questions that we're curious about, and of course, this is a slightly different setting, right? Normally, we would be in a room, and we'd be kind of having a conversation about some of these things, and we'd be learning about one another. This is a little bit different. Thus, we have our polls. So I'm actually going to start a poll right now asking you about what specifically you're interested in learning. We won't keep this one up as long as the last one in the interest of kind of going along quickly with our learning today. And unfortunately, the polls do block what the other content that's on the slide. But we're also curious, normally it's really fun to talk about, you know, what's your disciplinary area, what's your research background, and of course, if you have anything, any burning questions that you really want to know about. You're welcome to speak to your discipline, your research area in the chat if you would like, as well as, of course, ask questions throughout. So right now, Margarita and Rachel are monitoring the chat, and I'll be switching over to monitoring the chat in the second half while Rachel is doing the demo. Okay, we've had most of you taking the poll. Thank you for doing that. Let me share these poll results with you. So it looks like, again, we have kind of a mixed bag. A lot of people are just interested in a general introduction. Again, excellent, you came to the right place. Managing your citations and creating bibliographies, perfect, we're gonna cover that. Someone's interested in creating shared group libraries. We're gonna kind of allude to that and talk a little bit about it. We're also gonna talk a little bit about how Zotero compares to similar tools. And if, as you're going through, again, if you have questions, if you have other areas of interest that are sort of springing to mind, please do share that in the chat box so that we can help address it. All right, close out our polls. So a little bit of context about citation management. You've likely seen a research life cycle diagram, which is what I put up in the upper left corner of my screen. And so this one might look familiar. Your mileage may vary depending on your research area, but generally I think this one does a good job of sort of representing the various stages of research that we might be going through, as we're conducting research, as we're publishing, and as we're sort of iterating constantly in our research area. So one of the constants, pretty much regardless of your disciplinary area, is that you're going to be reading a lot of literature. You're going to be citing that literature. You're probably going to be publishing in some form or fashion. So I think that the comic from PhD Comics that's down in the lower right-hand corner does a pretty good job of maybe, replicating, documenting the experience that most of us have probably had as we are sifting through all of the literature and increasingly feeling overwhelmed by it. Of course, we're talking mostly about digital research and organizing our digital research rather than our stacks of articles and books that are piled up. But I think it's pretty apt, and it actually goes to one of the reasons why we think that a citation manager like Zotero is pretty useful. Citation management is going to save you time and headaches. By having everything in one place rather than sort of scattered. Maybe you dropped a citation in a notes doc. Maybe you have some in a Google Doc. Maybe you emailed one to yourself in a fit of desperation. Maybe you completely lost one and you can't remember where you put it, if you even put it anywhere. So these are very normal scenarios, but we do want to help empower you with some tools to hopefully not have to experience these headaches moving forward. Increasingly we're doing all sorts of online research. So, one thing that I've seen, especially with citation managers, is this feeling of, man, I really should have started using this 2 years ago. I should have started using this at the beginning of my academic career, whatever it might be. So I would just say, don't let any feeling of regret hold you back from starting to use Zotero or another citation management tool now, because it really is a great practice to get into, and one that will pay dividends as you continue to consistently use it, to organize your research. So this gets us to, well, why Zotero? There are lots of reasons why Rachel and I really like Zotero. One is that it's pretty easy to use. So I was sort of alluding to earlier that, you can actually use Zotero really simply to do some of the basic things you need to do, organizing, citing, and not have to, learn too much about the tool in order to make it useful to you. At the same time, as you want to become more advanced, you can absolutely learn some of the tricks of the trade, and Zotero can sort of evolve with you as your research needs evolve. It's an open source tool. This is really something that's quite important to us, and we think is really beneficial for our users. So the fact that this is not a proprietary tool, the fact that this will be free for you to use in perpetuity, it has open citation standards, so you can migrate your data. This is really important because let's just say you go away today, you're sold on Zotero, we did our good work, and you're using Zotero, but then 2 years later, maybe you join another research group, or maybe you just decide, hey, Zotero is not really meeting my needs right now. I'd like to move to a different citation manager. So with Zotero, that's fine, because you can really easily export your data. Think of all of these citations that you have, meticulously pulled together, organized, kept safe. With some citation managers, it can actually be very challenging to export those citations. So you effectively get this data lock-in where, the work that you've been doing to manage all of these citations gives you another headache down the road if you are choosing to move those citations. So for that reason, you can access your citations when you leave UCR. Because you're not paying for something where, when you leave UCR, you might choose like, hey, I don't really want to pay for that anymore, because it's freely available, and because it's not actually associated with your UCR affiliation. It's really easy as you go through your academic career to continue to use this tool. There are desktop and web-based versions to fit your varying research workflows. We'll talk a little bit more about this in a few slides, and it'll make a little bit more sense. And then the fact that Zotero can be used offline, specifically with the desktop version. Maybe you do field work and you're not actually able to be assured that you'll have a stable internet connection. This might be really important to you to have a citation manager that you're able to use without internet access. Or maybe, most of your research is done and you know that you'll have a stable internet connection. So depending on, again, your individual research needs, this may or may not be important. One of the graphics that I put on this slide, just as sort of an FYI, refers to the cloud storage that is provided by Zotero. So when you're thinking about building your library, you have, and this again will make more sense when Rachel demos this later in this presentation, you have the option, of course, of not only saving citations, but also saving PDFs, saving documents that are associated with your citations. So you have the ability to access up to 300 megabytes of storage in the Zotero cloud if you should so choose. And then if you are interested in using Zotero cloud storage, there is a fee that would be associated with this. So this is just something to be aware of. And one important thing that Rachel actually reminded me of yesterday when we were talking through this is that if you choose to save your files locally, so you're using a desktop version of Zotero that you've downloaded, and you download those files and you set your settings to only save a local copy on your hard drive, you're not actually going to run into any of this. This is only if you're using their cloud services. So it's basically you're paying for data storage, you're not paying for access to this tool. So it is something that I want to point out as something to just be aware of again as you're thinking about Zotero and as you're setting up your own Zotero instance and workflow. Okay, so how does Zotero compare to other citation managers? This is going to be really brief because honestly, this could be its own, workshop. And we do actually offer some other citation management workshops. We're always keen to hear what people are most interested in. Right now, we're offering a paper pile, which is down at the bottom workshop if you're interested. So this will be brief, and know that if you're really struggling to figure out what the right citation manager is for you, that there are lots of pretty detailed comparison charts that are available online. So I would definitely encourage you to check those out. So EndNote is a citation management system that you've probably heard of in the past. It's heavily used in STEM disciplines. So some of the pros include that there are also desktop and online versions similar to Zotero. Users will cite how quickly they can manage lots of citations at once and kind of go through and organize them easily. Some of the cons are that it is proprietary software. So this means that it's owned by a commercial entity. That commercial entity is within its rights to change the terms on you as a user at any point. And there is a fairly hefty cost that's associated with it. I'm not sure what that cost is at this point in time, but I think it's potentially in the hundreds. This is a fairly costly program to use. It's something that I would say, unless you have access to a lab that is already using this and is paying for the licenses, this is something that you may not need as a beginner to citation management. Mendeley is another option. Some of the pros include that there's a social networking aspect that's part of Mendeley. So you have like a researcher profile with your picture and some of your research interests. You can even share some of your own scholarship there. That does make it a little bit different from the rest of these tools that we're talking about. Mendeley also has more advanced annotation features. So if you're wanting to mark up PDFs and annotate them and sort of take notes within those documents, you can do that within Mendeley. The cons, again, this is also a proprietary tool. It was actually purchased by Elsevier a few years ago, so it's no longer openly available. It is free up to a certain amount of usage. I think it's like a freemium model at this point. But we have witnessed changes to Mendeley's model of supporting users, and the tool has been developed in different ways. So again, with a commercially owned product, you don't necessarily know if perhaps at some point they will move to being a fully paid user subscription or something like that. Paperpile is the last that we'll talk about. It's not the last citation manager out there, but in the interest of time and in the interest of not being able to go over all of the different tools for citation management, this is the one that we wanted to end on. We do offer workshops, as I said before, about Paperpile. This is a fairly new tool to the citation management game. It's great for heavy users of Google Docs. So we found that we have researchers who are doing most of their collaborative writing in Google Drive, Google Docs. They really love Paperpile. Another pro is that it does have more advanced annotation features similar to Mendeley. Again, being able to mark things up, make your notes. Cons, this is a proprietary software. This is not owned by a large commercial entity, but all the same, it is proprietary. It does cost money. This is a fairly smaller user fee than, say, EndNote. I think it's about $30-something per year at this point. One thing to note is that if you are affiliated with UCR, you actually have this paid for by the UCR library. So make sure if you're signing up for an account that you sign up using your UCR email address. Definitely worth noting that as soon as you are not affiliated with UCR, you won't be able to use it for free any longer, and you would have to sort of migrate your account to your own Paperpile account. So I like to just point that out in case you're a senior right now, just so that you are sort of thinking about, okay, if I'm changing institutions or if I'm moving along in my academic career, what will that mean for you to adopt a new tool? And the only other con, which maybe it's not a con, again, it just sort of depends on your particular circumstances, is that Paperpile is browser-based, so you really do need to have a stable internet connection and internet access in order to reliably use this tool. Okay, I'm going to spend just a few slides, a very short amount of time, talking about basically setting up Zotero and getting Zotero to work for you, especially hearing that we have a lot of folks that are new to Zotero. So maybe you haven't downloaded it yet or poked around. So we just wanted to make sure that we equipped you with the information that you need when you leave our workshop and you're ready to start downloading Zotero and setting up your own workflows. So this is what you're going to see when you go to zotero.org. And one of the important things to think about that again will be sort of driven home when you are seeing what Rachel demos for us in just a few minutes is that there are sort of three aspects to Zotero. There's Zotero Desktop, which is an instance of Zotero that you would download just like a piece of software. You'd be able to open it up on your device. There's the browser-based Zotero, which means that you would go to the Zotero website and you would log in with your credentials. You can link these two so that they'll both recognize who you are as a user. You can sync your library across both of them, but there are those two ways to access Zotero. And then the third piece of it that you'll want to sort of think about in your mental map of Zotero and its functionality is a connector, which is basically a plugin for your browser. And that's the thing that helps Zotero import into your library. I'll note that if you're a little confused and you're like, I don't know what you're talking about yet, that's okay. And we're gonna illustrate this more clearly. But when you go to Zotero to download these two pieces, the web-based version, obviously you don't have to download anything. Again, you would just log in through zotero.org. But if you do want to have this desktop version, and you do want to have this plugin, this is what you're gonna see. Zotero is going to recognize what kind of device you have. So this is basically saying, oh, hey, Brianna, you know, I recognize that you have a Mac. So here's what I'm recommending that you download right now. So hopefully with Zotero doing some of that work for you, you're gonna be able to download download this instance of Zotero so you can have a desktop version. And you're also gonna be able to install this plugin. So this plugin, as Rachel will show you, is just gonna show up at the top of your browser like any other plugin that you would be using. It's a little confusing. They call it a connector, but it's a plugin. So you might be wondering, okay, I'm confused. There's a desktop version, there's a browser version. I don't really understand why, like which one should I have? Should I have both of them? I think especially if you're a new user, it's worth it to poke around in both to kind of explore the differences between the two of them. Again, as I shared before, you'll have a user account that will, you know, they'll both recognize you and you're syncing your libraries across both. So functionally, they're a little bit different, but content-wise, you're going to have access to your same content in both places. You can use connectors with either version. So that plugin that I just talked about will be able to import to either of those, again, because it's synced across, you know, across the platform. So one of the things to note is that obviously if you're downloading something, you know, if you're downloading the desktop version, you're probably going to want to use that on your own personal device. If say you're using a loaned laptop in the library, if you're using somebody else's device, you probably just want to use the browser version, which allows you to easily sign in and then sign out. It's worth noting that the browser version is a little bit less robust, but again, for your basic tasks, you're probably going to be just fine. One of the things that does come into play, as I mentioned before, is whether you're wanting to save PDFs. So if you're wanting to save PDFs as you're doing your importing, you probably want to be on your desktop version so that you can save locally to your hard drive instead of to that cloud storage. And the last thing, which you would probably already assume, is that it's best to only keep one version of Zotero open at one time. This just keeps your system from being confused. It allows it to import into one place and then to sync across both. I'm actually not going to go too much into importing items into Zotero, but this is mostly a slide just to give you a little heads up about some of what Rachel is going to walk us through. One of the most powerful and I think magical aspects of Zotero, the thing that always gets the oohs and the ahs when we do these workshops, when we talk about Zotero with new users, is its ability to help automatically import these items into our library. So Rachel is going to talk through that, but these are a few examples of the places that Zotero can automatically import from. Our library catalog, it's able to read the bibliographic metadata and just pull it right into the library. Databases, with many databases, it can also grab that associated PDF, again, through the plugin that I talked a little bit about. It can make snapshots of web pages and locally store a copy of that web page in addition to potentially picking up some other metadata. And metadata is basically all of those elements of a citation, right? Like who's the author, when was this published, all of that information. So when I talk about metadata, that's the information that I'm talking about. You can also add manually, But what Rachel and I are setting you up for is that hopefully you will not have to actually add too much manually, and most of what you will be able to do is just bringing things in automatically. My last caveat, Zotero usually does a pretty good job with bringing in metadata and bringing in the citation information, but you always want to check that information to make sure it's accurate, because sometimes it'll grab things and put it in the wrong field. So as always, you don't want to fully rely on this tool to have everything correct, and you want to just make sure you're scanning through it as you go. Okay, I'm going to turn things over to Rachel now, and she is going to demo all of this for us. So hopefully some of the context that I've shared will now make more sense.
All right, I'm going to leave it on this slide though, and just kind of mention that we're going to demo today. We're going to start off by just looking at the interface to try and get a little more familiar with it, demystify. There's a lot of menus and buttons. That can always be a kind of a barrier when you're first learning to use a new tool. Then we're going to spend time talking about organizing your citation library. How do we get items into Zotero if you do have that browser plugin installed? We'll look very briefly at if you're using a word processor like Microsoft Word, there's an additional kind of piece that you can get a plugin for your word processor and actually put citations right in as you're writing, and then different ways to generate bibliographies. So that's a lot. I'll dive right in. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Sorry, just getting a few things set up so I make sure you all can see my full screen. All right, so this is Zotero for desktop, and I'm using a Windows machine. This might look slightly different from what you see when you first open up Zotero. In particular, I have things like group libraries that are showing up here, and if there's time at the end, we can talk about using Zotero for collaboration. But in general, when you first start using Zotero, you'll have one library, and then you can make as many different collections or folders within that library as you want to organize your materials. So whenever I first start using a new tool, I find it helpful to kind of visually break down what we're looking at. So basically, the Zotero desktop software is broken into these three kind of panes. So over here on the left, we're looking at our library and collections details. And then in the middle here, we have all of those different citations and items that you've imported into your library. And then over on the right-hand side, we have the item details pane. And there's a couple of different tabs here that we'll look at. Primarily, the info tab is super useful because this is where all of those information details, the metadata for different citations appears. And that will be automatically populated if you do import stuff from the web. And we'll look at a couple of different places you might be importing from and how to use that browser plugin in a minute. But before we do that, I wanted to just take a minute and kind of look through kind of this interface in a little more detail. So as I said, you have the ability to create as many collections as you want. So I have a collection here just for this workshop today. You can use this button right here above this libraries and collections pane on the left to create a new collection. Call it whatever you want. I'm just going to create one as a test. And then that will show up under your library. And obviously it won't have any items in it yet, but it's really easy to get items into it. So if you click on your library, this will show you all of the items that you have in your entire library, regardless of where they live in different collections. And it's really easy, really, you just have to drag and drop. So once you've imported some items, you can just click on them. You can shift click or control click or command click, depending on your operating system, to select items that you want, and then you can just drag them into any collections, and then they will show up in that collection. So it's a bit kind of like an iTunes sort of interface. It's also possible to add sub-collections. So you'll see these little arrows here. You can create nested folders, subfolders, and you can do that by right-clicking on any collection, and you get this little context menu. So in here, you can rename collections, you can delete them, and you can also add additional sub-collections inside of them. So I'll call this a subfolder. And again, it's not going to have anything in it right when you create it, but that's how you do that. And again, you can just drag and drop to add items to those collections. If you want to get rid of a folder, you can also do that from that right-clicked submenu. And if you want to delete the items inside as well, you can do that. I'm not going to, because I want to keep those citations in my library, so I'm just going to delete that collection. And before we move on to looking at the actual citations, which is going to be the bulk of this demo, I just wanted to mention some of these things that appear over here on the left. So my publications is a place where you can add citations for works that you have authored. So those will appear on your public Zotero profile page if you want. I'll just add a word of caution though, be very careful what you do add here because it will show up publicly. So you want to make sure that you don't add anything like PDFs or really any content that you don't have the rights to share because it could be a copyright violation. But this is what that is. As you can see, I'm not personally using it, but it is an option if you're interested. A duplicate item. So this is a really useful feature of Zotero in that if you accidentally add the same citation to your library more than once, in this instance, I added this book twice, 3 years apart. I obviously had forgotten that I'd seen it already. But Zotero will look at the metadata and say, well, this has the same title and editor, so it's probably the same item, and it will flag it so that you can merge them together into one citation. Another word of caution, though, it is possible for Zotero to flag things as duplicates that are not actually duplicates. So in this case, these are two different journal articles that are actually reviews of the same book, but they're different articles. So I wouldn't want to merge those, but that's what duplicate items is. Also, if you just add stuff to your library and you don't specify which folder or collection you want to put it in, it will just show up in this unfiled items. I have a lot of items actually that I apparently never filed. So that's what this is. And then finally over here on the left, we have the trash. Mine's quite messy right now. But things appear here if you deliberately send them to the trash. And what I mean by that is if you're in a collection and you try to delete an item. So if I'm highlighting this item and I hit the delete button on my keyboard, I get this little dialog box and it asks, are you sure you want to remove it from the collection? And if I hit OK, it's no longer in this collection, but it's still in my library. So if I search for it up here in this search bar, you'll see that that item is still in my library, and you can easily undo that or move it to a different collection as needed. If you really want to delete something, you'll have to right-click on it, and you'll get this context menu. And you have a couple of options here. And if you want to really delete it, that's move item to trash. So there's a difference between kind of deleting from a collection and actually trashing something. And things will stay in trash for 30 days. And then Zotero will permanently remove them. And you can also restore stuff. So if you accidentally trashed something, you can always restore it to your library really easily. All right, so here in the center pane is where you'll probably spend a lot of time looking at items, and this is where you'll be exporting citations from if you want to do that from inside Zotero. So you'll notice here that there's different icons for these different items, for these different citations. And that is because Zotero stores different kinds of metadata, different kinds of information fields for different kinds of citations or different types of items. So this is a web page, this is a book, this is a dissertation, and this is an article, and they all have slightly different fields. There's certain fields that are held in common across items, so like title and date and URL can be really useful, and we'll see that in a minute. But in general, and you can change this, if you selected item type and you wanted to change this journal article to a book section, you'll get a little warning that'll say you will lose this field because DOI is not a field in the book section type. So something to be aware of. And if you do want to manually create an item, you just go up to this little green plus sign above this central pane here to create a new item, and you'll see some of the most common item types. These are the ones that you have personally used recently. But if you go down to more, there are a lot of different item types. So Zotero makes it really easy to kind of customize the information that you store for all the different kinds of citations you want to be storing as you're doing your research. So that's useful to know about. You can also link to files. We don't really have time to get into that, but if anyone has questions about using Zotero to store files, go ahead and pop those in chat and we can get to those later. All right. It's also possible, we won't spend a lot of time on this, but you can kind of customize the display a little bit. If you wanted to add different fields to display here in this item pane, you can just go up to the little table icon and add things to display here. You can move columns around, you can remove things, and you can always restore the column order if you decide you don't like your changes. And then over here in the right-hand side, we've already seen how Zotero is storing different pieces of your citations in the item details pane, but there's also a notes pane, and I should mention all of this is searchable. So we don't have time as well to kind of get into the really nitty-gritty about advanced searching in Zotero, but again, if you have questions, do let us know. And I'll kind of mention it very briefly, but notes, tags, PDFs that you import into your Zotero library, if they're indexed, all of this will be searchable. So I like to use Zotero as a kind of central repository for all my research materials, because it's, at that moment of, I forget where I read that thing or what the page number was. If you're taking notes on things as you're, doing your research, you can add notes to individual items, individual citations. So I'll just, copy and paste all of my notes in here, or you can type in here with this little text editor. And then, down the line when you're trying to search for, well, who talked about that particular, location or person or whatever, you'll be able to find that really easily. So you can also create standalone notes in any collection. If you go up to this little sticky notes button, so you can create a new standalone note, and that will just be an item, like a text file in your Zotero library. So that can also be useful. And then tags are keywords that you can add to kind of further help organize your materials. So if you wanted, to tag things for the topics, or, really anything that you could think of using tags for it, they can be really useful. And I'll note that down here on the bottom left, kind of in an odd location in terms of the interface, like I don't know why it's not here. It's over here on the left. This is where tags appear. So I don't really have a lot of tags on items in this particular collection. I just have this one tag, and only one item has that tag. But if I go ahead and add a tag to this book, and then I search for all the items that have that tag on it, they'll appear. So it's just another kind of way to customize how you organize your materials. And you can also search, this is the tag search bar down here. Related items, we'll go into detail on this, but essentially you can link one or more items together if you want to group them in a way that's not using tags. So I like to do this to connect books and then reviews of those books. So if I go to a book in my library, I can easily see, does it have any related items? Oh, I've read, a book review for that or whatever. So that can also be useful. All right, and I'll pause now and ask if anyone has any really specific or short questions that are interface based before we move into importing items from online. I can see if I can pull up the chat. I'm not able to see the chat super easily. So if there are any questions, we're going to look at bibliographies in a minute. So that's a great question, and I will address that. So let's go ahead and look at importing items from online. So I'm going to move over to my browser now, and I'm using Firefox. We're going to look at a couple of different places you might commonly import Zotero, import items into your Zotero library from. So we'll start by looking at the library catalog, how you might import from a database, something like JSTOR, where you can also easily get the full text PDFs and import those into your library as well. But you can import web pages, podcasts, really. It's kind of limitless and very flexible in terms of the kinds of materials as you're doing online research, especially. And so if you have the Zotero connector or browser plugin installed, you'll see a little icon on your toolbar. So for me, it's up here. And this is essentially the button that you're going to want to click whenever you're on the item that you want to import into your library. And I'll also mention that when you, so if you have your desktop or your browser-based Zotero open, whichever collection you're looking at, you're pointed at, that's where things are going to get stored. So it's useful to kind of think about that. You can also customize it. We'll look at an example. So I'm just going to do a kind of sample search. And I see that there's questions in chat, and I apologize that I can't really view them as I'm sharing my screen. It's not super easy, but we will get to questions later. All right, so if you do a search in a library catalog or in a library database, which we'll look at next, any place where you're seeing a page like this of different search results, you'll notice that the icon for Zotero in the browser bar changes to a folder. So that, if you click the folder, will allow you to import multiple citations at once, which is really, really useful. So I'm just going to select a couple and hit OK, and you'll see that it's saving to Zotero Workshop, which is the folder that I had selected or open in my Zotero software. Oops, I did not click fast enough. But if I go back over here, we will see that those items are now in that folder. All right, hopping back over to the library catalog. So now that I've clicked on a specific item in the catalog, you'll notice that the icon has changed to a book because Zotero has automatically recognized using the metadata in the catalog that this is a book. So if I click on this, I believe I already imported this one. And here, if you click more, you can actually change where you're saving things to right here in the browser, and that's really useful. And if we go back over, yep, it's in here twice because I had imported it using the folder icon as well as the book icon. So that's kind of quick and dirty how you get items in using the Zotero connector. I'll mention here while we're in the library catalog, because all items have a URL field, if you're doing research and you might want to come back and check out a book or find a book through the library catalog in the future, you can click on the permalink, which will give you a permanent link that will let you find this source again in the future. And if you copy that, and I'm going to go back over to Zotero, and in the URL field for this item, I'm just going to paste that permalink. So now, anytime I come back to use this citation or see things that I've added to it, I'll be able to easily get back to the page in the library catalog where that's stored. So that can be really useful. All right. UCR Library also has provides access to a number of research databases. So I'll just also demo how you might grab citations from a database. And I'm going to search for one that I know has information on my example search of Greek temples. And of course, to access databases from off campus, you will want to be logged into your VPN. So that it will recognize that you are a UCR person and give you access. So I'm going to do the search in this database. And it's really the same as the library catalog. As soon as we get to a page where we have search results, we'll get the little folder icon. So if we click on that, we can import multiple citations at once and select where they're going to go. And if we go back over, we'll notice that Zotero has automatically recognized that these were book sections or chapters in books. But you'll also notice, and this is something that Brianna alluded to, this information, depending on what database you're importing things from, the metadata may be super clean, it may be a little bit inaccurate, or things might be in the wrong field. So here in the book title, we have much more information than just the book title. So I always like to, as soon as I've imported something, kind of go in and just double check that this is actually correct information. And I would go in and I would add that editor information, things that were stored here. So you might need to do a little bit of cleanup, but that's worth it in the long run when you get to actually exporting citations. And just to demo, just to demo what it looks like and the ability to to bring full text PDFs into Zotero automatically. If you do a search on something like JSTOR or any database where you do get access to the full text PDFs right there in the search results, Zotero will automatically, I mean, it's a setting. I think the setting is set to import PDFs by default. But if you are looking at a database where you have PDFs and you import an item that has an associated full text PDF, Zotero will grab that and add it to your, oops. All right, something went wrong. It might be that my, I was logged out or it didn't recognize that I was at UCR. So we can try that again. So that's something we'd have to troubleshoot. That should automatically be pulling in the full text PDF. This to me indicates that there's something, you know, I'm not logged in properly or something like that. We can address that later. But in general, it would, as you go and you look at that, it would have brought in the full text PDF. You can also download it and drag and drop it right in and add it to an item so that you have PDFs kind of linked to your items. And you can do the same thing for a web page. Different web pages will be recognized by Zotero. Sometimes it'll think a web page is a blog post, and you'll want to kind of clean up the item type. So this is not actually a blog post, it's a full web page. So you can just go in and change the item type and kind of clean that up a little bit. All right, so that's kind of the basics of importing.
Hey, Rachel, we have a request to demo Google Scholar. Do you have time to test out Google Scholar?
Let's see. Yeah, we can do that for sure. So I'll do the same search, Greek temples, on here. And again, depending on where you're getting, if you're logged in, if you're using your UCR VPN, you may or may not get access to things like full text PDFs, but you get the same options, slightly different, look. Let's try importing a couple of different types. I wonder if the full text will work. Ah, yes, it worked that time. I'm not sure what was going on with JSTOR because that was working for me earlier. So it looks like Greek temples and Greek worshipers. Yes. So we've imported this item from Google Scholar, and it actually tells you that we got it from Google Scholar, and that's right there. And it pulled in the full text PDF. One other thing is if you don't have the browser plugin installed, maybe you're on a library computer or a computer that's not your own, but you want to automate the process. You don't want to go in and manually, create a book and like type in all of this by hand. There's this magic wand button here that's add items by identifier. So if you know an item's DOI or ISBN number, any kind of unique identifier that's assigned to an item like a book or an article or a data set, you can click on this and copy and paste. So I'll actually just grab a book. Oh, we didn't get the ISBN. Here we go. Okay. So we already have 2 copies of Grinnell. We're going to try and add a 3rd copy. We're going to try and retrieve all the information for this book using its ISBN. So I'm hitting enter. So now we have Grinnell, and we have all the information for this book, and it was retrieved from the Library of Congress. Sometimes Zotero will go and look at WorldCat. It will go and find this information in different ways, but that's just something really useful to know about this little magic wand. If you don't have access to import things like books that have a DOI or in another kind of identifier, if you're doing research online. All right, so I do want to demo very briefly the creation of citations and bibliographies, since I know that's a big component of using a citation manager like Zotero. So this is just a dummy Word document, and of course, this is going to look different for different word processing tools. But for me, using Microsoft Word, if you're writing and you want to insert a citation from your Zotero library, you need to install the Zotero plugin for your word processor. So I installed the Zotero plugin for Microsoft Word, for Office 365 or whatever it's called now. So up here on the menu bar, I have this Zotero button. So Zotero gives me the option as I'm writing in Word to add and edit citations and add and edit bibliographies. And the first time that we add or edit a citation, it's going to bring up document preferences and ask us about things like, do you want to use the Chicago style? Do you want to use APA style? So you can kind of customize that and add citations as you write. So I'll go ahead and do that. So this is what I meant about bringing up document preferences the first time you add a citation. You get to just choose whether you're adding it as a footnote or an endnote. You can choose whether to keep it automatically updating. So I like to leave this checked because if you make a change to any of the information in Zotero for your citation and you don't have this checked, it's going to be static. So whatever your citation looked like when you first imported it, that's what it's going to stay looking like, versus if you automatically update it, changes will be reflected. So here's where you would, select the citation style that you want to use. And once you've hit add or edit citation, then in this little search bar that pops up, you search for whatever reference you want to insert. So I'm going to insert this book here. You can also add more than one. And this search, I believe, searches titles, authors, and date, maybe? Have to double check on that. So if I search for title. So yeah, it's searching titles. So I'm going to add this, these two, and I'll hit enter. And because I selected APA 7th edition, this is the style. If I go into document preferences and change that back to, Chicago style, that actually automatically changed that one. So now if we scroll down and look at the footnote, this is a Chicago style footnote. If you click on it, we'll notice that it's highlighted in gray. So you can make little changes here if you need to remove a space or fix it up or whatever. But once you've added a bunch of, citations, I'll just add one more. And there might be some formatting weirdness. But once you've added your citations, you have them in here and they've been automatically populated from Zotero. You can go down to your Works Cited page and automatically generate a bibliography. And this is kind of the magical part. And hopefully it works. So you can go to add and edit bibliography, and it will look at all of the citations you've already added and automatically generate this bibliography. And again, you control the citation style. So that's essentially one way of using the actual word processor plugin to get citations and bibliographies in. And I'll just show you another way if you don't have that plugin for your word processor or you're using Google Docs or whatever. You can write inside of Zotero, copy and paste citations and export bibliographies. So if you want to just copy one citation, like for this book here, I would right click on it and no, that's to do a whole bibliography. If you have the item selected, there's actually a keyboard shortcut, but if you go to, in the file menu, edit, and then copy citation, it's Control-Shift-A on my particular operating system. So if I copy that, and then I go back over to my Word document, I can, insert a footnote. Sorry, I can't see. Oh. Insert a footnote and then hit paste. And it's going to paste as whatever citation style you have set as your Zotero default. And we can look at that if folks have questions about that in particular. So that's another way you can just copy and paste citations. You can also generate bibliographies from a collection. So if I right click on this collection, I can say create bibliography from collection, and that will look at all of the items in that collection, create a bibliography in whatever citation format you choose, and you can choose to do different things. I'm going to copy it to the clipboard so I can go and put it in my Word document. So I just hit paste. So now all the references from that entire collection have been pasted as a bibliography in Word. All right, so I think we have a couple of minutes for questions.
I think we've responded to most of the questions that have come through so far. We did have a few questions about, what's the process for doing this in Google Docs? How do I get this plugin for Microsoft Word? So we've shared some links in the chat if you're not looking in the chat right now. As Rachel said, we have a few more minutes for questions. So please feel free to write those in the chat.
Yes, I see the question about getting your citations and bibliographies into Google Docs. So I would recommend exporting citations in the way I just most recently showed, copying the citation or generating a bibliography in Zotero and then pasting it in Google Docs. That's probably the easiest way. I see a question about RefWorks versus Zotero. Brianna, did you want to take that?
Sorry, I was on mute. I actually have not used RefWorks, so I can't actually speak to it. I will say, of the other citation managers that I mentioned, my preference probably comes through pretty clearly. I think that Zotero for a general use citation manager is the way to go. I haven't seen as much sort of continuous improvement and development of RefWorks over the past few years. I think that there was a much more active development community around it in the past. So that would be my, I have to say that with the caveat that I'm not a RefWorks user, but that would be my take. I don't know, Rachel, if you have any thoughts.
I'm also not really a RefWorks user. I'm fully Zotero. But I would just echo what you mentioned earlier, Brianna, about Zotero being open. And no matter what institution, if you don't have an institutional affiliation, you don't have access to particular software, you can always use Zotero because it's open source. Adding a citation to a PDF. Do you mean adding a PDF file to an item? If you have like a PDF on your computer and you wanted to add that into Zotero, I can demo that. Perfect. Okay. Yes. So I think I have some PDFs on my desktop or somewhere. So you have a couple of options. You can drag and drop, or you can add a link to a file or store a copy of the file. So the easiest method is honestly just to drag and drop. And now I'm showing all the stuff that's open on my computer. But if you have your Zotero desktop here and you have a file, you would literally just drag it onto. So I would have to go and find a PDF and drag and drop it to demo it. But does that make sense? Actually, you know what? I'll just find another PDF and save it. Well, all right, so now I have a PDF on my desktop, and I will drag this onto whatever book, and then it shows up there. By dragging and dropping, you're creating a second copy. So that copy of the file now lives in the Zotero folder wherever it's installed on your computer. You can also just link to files. So say you have a PDF library on your computer and you don't want to have duplicate copies in Zotero, you would link to the file using this link to file option, and then you would just point to where something lives and link to that And then you can move that around, and there's a little link icon here. Oh, it actually imported the entire, oh, fascinating. Zotero even surprises me sometimes. So it automatically, when I linked that PDF, it found the matching citation and attached the PDF automatically, so I didn't even have to do that. But yes, thank you all. If you have other questions, we are available.
Yeah, so we are going to stop recording in just a moment. Thank you for all the wonderful questions. I see that we still have a few questions, and Rachel and I will hang out for a little bit to try to address those as best as we can. Thank you all for attending. We would love it if you gave us some feedback through our workshop assessment Google form, which is linked in the group chat. If you have time, we read all of the responses, and it would really help us to know what we need to work on and improve and know what's working. The last thing I'm going to say, as I know we have people leaving, we didn't go over these concluding slides, but you're going to feel stuck at some point in your Zotero journey. Maybe it'll be at the beginning, maybe it'll be in the middle, maybe you're going to run into problems importing something that you're like, hey, this should be able to automatically import it. We wanted to make sure that we pointed you to the user forums. Zotero does a really great job, has a very active user community. So there's actually a ton of information that's available online. The other thing we'll note is that we are happy to work one-on-one with you if you have more specific or advanced Zotero questions. So please feel free to reach out to the two of us. We're happy to find time to meet individually or in a small group with you to address those questions. And with that, thank you, everyone. You'll be getting a link to this recording and our slides very soon. Have a great day.
All right, Arturo, I see your question if you're still here about adding a citation to a PDF. And I don't believe that's possible in Zotero, because if you have a file sitting in your Zotero folder, that's just a file. If you wanted to add a citation, so really it's the reverse of what you're asking. You want to add a PDF to a citation. Zotero doesn't allow you to do it in the opposite way. So a PDF is always going to be like a child item, and a citation will always be the parent item. If you have a free-floating PDF, you can do that, but you can also add a PDF to a citation. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question? Okay, perfect. Thank you all.